Hello everyone, welcome to Best Recipes with Sharon. Today's recipe is about how to make Italian minestrone soup. This is my version of it. Although there's many variations of how to make this soup, it's primarily made up of vegetables. And you can add whatever vegetables you have around. It can be as thick or as thin as you want it to be. I tend to like to load it down and have it full of a lot of substance. So it's time to go ahead and start making this soup. And it will be made in layers, so it's important to follow along and see what's put in next and what the ingredients are that I'm using in my soup. And like I said, you can substitute and make it your own if you want to. So turn your heat on high and put a nice big pot on the stove and add about 4 cups of beef broth to get started. Now you can substitute for chicken broth, but I prefer the beef. And if you use just water, it would work for someone who wanted to make it totally vegan. So just take and turn on the 4 cups of beef broth and get it starting to boil. Take a separate frying pan, add a little bit of butter, and add about 400 grams of prosciutto. This is a thinly sliced Italian dry cured ham, or sort of like a salty bacon if you will. So here we'll just render it down a little bit, make it ready to go in the soup so that we've decreased some of the fat content in it and just heated it through a little bit. Only takes a few minutes for that, then you just take and chop it up and set it aside till you're ready to add it. Now make sure to wash all of your vegetables before you start. But here we're adding half a cup each of chopped carrots and celery. And also half a cup of chopped sweet onion. Now take these 3 and add them to a frying pan that has melted butter, or you could use olive oil if you wish. Turn your heat on medium-high, saute these together until the onions become a little bit translucent. You're not going to cook them entirely, just saute them together for a few minutes. Then add at least 1 tablespoon of Italian seasoning. The nice thing about the Italian seasoning is that it has a nice blend of the spices all in one, and usually includes rosemary and thyme. And of course you'll need to take and stir that in a little bit. And after just a few minutes you'll notice that the onions are not so white, they've turned more translucent. So it's now ready to add to the beef broth. And here the broth has started to boil. So I'm going to go ahead and add these veggies to the beef broth, and then take my large spoon and give it a little stir. Turn your heat down to just a simmer. Now add the prosciutto, and we've already got this prepared ahead. You can add as much of this as you want, or as little. I know that primarily it's made up of vegetables, but it's nice to have a little bit of this meat in it. It really is a nice little touch. Then wash, cut, and chop some cabbage. And I add about a half cup of chopped cabbage to the soup base. And by now you'll have your soup turned down to just a simmer, because you don't want to overcook those vegetables. Just a reminder, because that's really important. Then take and chop a bell pepper. You can use whatever color you want. Here I'm using a yellow one, and I'll add about 1/3 of a cup of this. As you can see, it's an approximation, or a handful. And you can vary the amounts based on what you prefer and what you like more of. And here I'm going to prepare a little bit of broccoli. So I've washed it and chopped it up, and I'm going to add about a half a cup of this to the soup. And I really like the flavor that this adds, so I chop it fine because it adds the flavor, but for those who don't care for broccoli, they don't even notice it's in there. Now 1/4 of a cup of freshly chopped parsley, or you can use the dried parsley if that's what you have around. So I took a couple of stalks of bok choy, washed it, and I chopped it, and I got about 1 cup of chopped bok choy that I added to the soup. I added the greenery as well as the white part. Now this will shrink down just a little bit in the soup, that's why I added a full cup. Then I went on to add 1/2 cup of chopped zucchini. I just wanted a little bit in there and it will hold its size. And I chopped it in nice little chunks, and it'll spread nice and evenly throughout the soup. Now I'm adding 2 cups of diced tomatoes. And this is moving along quite quickly now because we're towards the end of our soup. This is canned tomatoes, so it doesn't need to cook, it just needs to heat through. Got to have beans in your minestrone soup. So I added about 3/4 of a cup of a 5-bean mix that came from a can. Yes, I didn't cook it from scratch, but this is the way I prefer to do it. It has a really nice mix of beans in it. You can add more of that if you feel like you want a little more beans in it than that, but about 3/4 of a cup I found was about right. And at this point I added 3 cups more of the beef broth. And as you go along, you can add as much of that as you feel you need in order to make it into a soup. And of course optional, but in my mind not optional, you need to have some pasta added to this soup. So I add half a cup of DITALI pasta. And of course, because it's pasta, it needs to cook for about 10 minutes, this one, and it will double in size. So you'll get probably about a cup of it by the time it cooks. So set a timer no longer than 10 minutes so that you don't overcook your pasta. And while that's cooking, add a little bit of salt and pepper to taste, or maybe a little more beef broth if you think you need it. So this is a good time to make sure that your seasoning is right. And if you need a little more Italian seasoning, add it then, whatever you think. Now then, while that's still cooking, I add 1 cup of chopped spinach. And again, this will shrink in size, even more than the bok choy, so that's why I added right at the last. So once that's in there, you'll just take a spoon and stir it in until it's well combined. And it's quite thick with vegetables, so I'm going to add just a little bit of water to thin it out into a little bit more of a soup base. And there's just one more thing that I forgot to add. It could be added at any point, and that's garlic. Always need a little bit of garlic in your soup. So I add 1 or 2 cloves of garlic, and I finally chop it and let it just simmer in the soup until the flavor gets spread throughout. And I'm just going to turn the stove off here. I'll let it simmer just for a minute or two, and then I'll remove it from the heat because as you can see here, it's cooked through pretty good and I don't want my vegetables to overcook. Okay, so it's time to dish up. Take a large ladle, scoop up as much as you want, and eat it just like it is. It's packed full. Here's a serving trio that you can add to it. Sprinkle with a little extra virgin olive oil, and garnish it with some Parmesan cheese. And of course that's the Canadian pronunciation. Or the original Italian name is Parmigiano. But who doesn't love a good bowl of minestrone soup? It's comforting and delicious. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and until next time, happy eating!